You've written a story. You had an idea, and then you sat down and you typed it up. You revised the story again and again. You shared it with your friends and other writers, and they gave you feedback, and you revised your story based on their feedback. You've edited your story so it's in its most presentable condition possible, and now you want to share it with a broader audience. You want to find someone to publish your story. How do you do that? Where do you find publications who may be interested in sharing your story with their audiences? Of course, you can use Google, but there are better resources for writers to help you find and connect with publications who may be interested in publishing your work. And in this video, I'm going to review some of the sources that I use. I'm Eric Aldrich. I teach writing and literature at Pima Community College in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm on sabbatical. The first resource I'm going to share for finding literary magazines and websites that will publish short fiction is The Grinder. The Grinder is a database that's maintained by Diabolical Plots, and Diabolical Plots is a website that publishes science fiction, horror, fantasy. They're a speculative fiction publication. So the way that this website works is you create an account, and when you submit something, you record that submission on the Grinder, and then when you get a response, you come and record the response on the Grinder as well. They take all of that data from users and they crunch it, and they create information for people who are trying to submit. So this is the main page. The main page lists recent rejections and acceptances. It can be a good place to kind of scan and browse to find something new. But primarily, you're going to use the search function, which is right here. Let's start with fiction, because that's what we're doing. There are several different filters you can apply to limit your search. First is genre. So if you are publishing fantasy or furry fiction, if you're publishing literary or science fiction, you can narrow your results of your search to just publications that accept the type of story you have written. So let's select science fiction, and then let's say what length, because we can submit from flash, which is a very short story, up to a novel, which of course is a novel. Let's just say short story. There are several other filters like word count and pay rate, and the default exclusions exclude temporarily closed and permanently closed submissions. When you hit search, they return results that match your filters. And as you can see, there's quite a few publications that accept science fiction short stories. When you click on a result, and let's say we use Apex Magazine, you get a page that contains data and information about Apex Magazine. So we start with the description of the magazine itself, and then what genres they publish, in this case fantasy, horror, and sci-fi, what lengths they publish, and the pay rate. Apex pays the Science Fiction Writers of America rate of 8 cents a word. We have a little bit more about the types of submissions they accept. And then we have this market response data box. And so this is information that's provided by users of the site. And then the site crunches it and compiles it and gives us this information here. So in the last year, 2,460 users of this site submitted to Apex Magazine, and of those people, only 0.44% were accepted. Now, the majority of people who submit fiction do not catalog their responses on the submission grinder. So that means that Apex Magazine received many more submissions than 2,460 in the last year. However, 2,460 is still a pretty large sample size, and if you know a little bit about statistics, that means that it is probably going to give us statistically significant results. And this shows us reliably that Apex Magazine is a very competitive place to submit your fiction to. Let's choose another search, and we'll do alphabetical listing this time. And we will go to, let's say we go to B. These are all of the literary magazines and websites that start with B. This is not filtered. So O means they're open to submissions. D means they don't qualify to be listed on the Grindr, usually because they don't have submission guidelines listed on their site or some other kind of wacky submission policy that doesn't make sense to the editors of this site. T means temporarily closed. P means permanently closed. So here's a long list of magazines and publications that you could consider submitting to. Let's try Barnstorm. Barnstorm only publishes general, which is like literary fiction, and they don't provide a description. I happen to know that Barnstorm is a publication from New Hampshire associated with a Masters of Fine Arts program, but that is not contained on the site. As you can see, only 4 people have reported their responses from Barnstorm to the Grindr. That's because the Grindr is primarily used by writers of speculative fiction or genre fiction, not literary fiction. Then the reason why that is because Diabolical Plots publishes speculative fiction. This market response data is not quite as useful. However, it still links to the website. And from the website, you can go and get an idea about what type of material they publish, how frequently they publish, what their submission guidelines are, etc. So that is the submissions Grindr. If you use this site, you will find that there are so many different publications, and the sort of challenge for a writer is sorting through them. Some are far more legitimate than others. Some are far more professional than others. But it's still a large searchable database for free. That's the other thing I will add. And while I'm on the subject, I'm going to hop over and talk a little bit about Duotrope. So Duotrope works the same way as the submission Grindr. You become a member of the site and you report your results of your submissions. You track your submissions through the site, and they give you data about each publication. It'll tell you if they're open, what they accept, what their publication guidelines are. The difference here, of course, is that Duotrope requires you to pay. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, which is not necessarily a bad rate for the information that you get. However, you have to pay for it. And so given my needs at this time, I don't pay for Duotrope. It does work very similar to the Grindr, but as I'm saying, I can't show you the interior of the site because I don't pay for it. Okay, moving on, I'm going to go to Entropy. So Entropy is a website. They publish essays and fiction, and they primarily publish literary fiction, but I think they're pretty flexible with genres too. It's actually a great website to read. I like reading Entropy, and so I would suggest spending some time reading what you find on this website. But if we're looking for literary magazines and websites to submit to, we're looking for the Entropy Where to Submit page, which is right here. And they break it down by months. So September, October, and November is where we are right now. So we click on this. They catalog a bunch of different options. So we can do presses and chapbooks, and these are for books. These are regular length books. These are very short books. And they also have fellowships, which are opportunities for writers to receive a stipend and write with some support from an institution. But sometimes it's a college, sometimes it's an artist group. But today we're going to look at journals and anthologies. These are the journals and anthologies that are accepting fiction within the period that is listed on Entropy. And as you see, there are many, many of them. They primarily focus on literary fiction rather than genre fiction. They do maintain this for each submission period, and so the information here is very reliable. I will say both for the Grindr and Diabolical Plots and for Entropy, thanks so much to the people who create and maintain these resources. They are immensely, immensely helpful, and because they're free, that is an even bigger bonus. But if you click on an entry here, you don't get the same data you get on the Grindr. What you get is a link to the submission guidelines on the website's page. If you wanted to know more about that publication other than just its submission guidelines, you would just click on, the header or home or however you get to home. And in this case, I've clicked on Copper Nickel, which is a magazine from Colorado. Entropy has a lot of good stuff, and I don't really have any criticism or drawbacks for using Entropy. I use it all the time, and I highly recommend this as a great resource for finding literary magazines and websites. The next resource I'm going to show you is similar to Entropy, and this is New Pages. New Pages is an online magazine. They don't publish original fiction. They are about fiction. And so you can find different resources here. There are calls for submission. There's the big list of literary magazines, writing contests. They also list graduate school programs, publishers, conferences, and more. Let's start with calls for submissions. Like the Grindr, you can sort and filter. So let's do fiction and let's do magazine. What we have are results of places that are looking for submissions right now. It's similar in this way to Entropy. You get a little bit of a listing. And the way this works is the publication who's looking for submissions creates a listing and provides it to New Pages, and New Pages puts it on their website. Let's look at Sky Island Journal. You just see the information here. And then if you want to know more, you go directly to the publication's website. Sky Island Journal has such a pretty website. They do such a nice job with it. And so you would use the submission guidelines to figure out what you needed to do if you wanted to submit your story. And of course, I would always suggest reading something from the website. It's, if there's something available to read, it'll give you an idea of the kind of stuff that the website publishes. You can submit your stories to magazines and websites that you haven't read. It's kind of limits your knowledge of the type of stories they accept, and you may be wasting your time somewhat. You may be wasting editors' time. It's usually best to have some idea of the place you're submitting to, even if it's just spending a little bit of time on their website and reading a few example stories. But that is how the calls for submission work on New Pages. If we click on literary magazines, we have an alphabetical list similar to what we saw on the Grindr. These are not necessarily magazines that are accepting fiction right now, but these are listings that have been created on New Pages. And to learn more about each one, you click on the individual publication, and it takes you to a page that contains information about the publication guidelines. And it's sort of like a cross between the Grindr and Entropy, insofar as you have a little bit more information than Entropy provides. Entropy just links you to the website of the publication. Here, New Pages gives you some data, though they don't do the compilation of user-submitted data like the Grindr or Duotrope. Of course, you can also sort your results. So if we say we can sort by print, online, or EPUB, or fiction, I'm just going to do any and filter by fiction. And then we have publications that are interested in publishing fiction. And it's a great place to start, a great jumping off point. I would say that this website, New Pages, is also heavily skewed toward literary fiction and does not have as many resources for science fiction or other genre fiction. So those are the basic websites that you can use to find databases or large listings of literary magazines and websites that you can read or submit to. The next resource I'm going to show you is Submittable. Submittable is actually a website that publications subscribe to and writers subscribe to. They facilitate the submission process. That means that when you submit to the magazine or the publication, you submit through Submittable. If you have submitted something, you will see it on your submissions page. Because I'm talking about finding places to submit, I'm showing you the Discover page. Like the other resources I've showed you, there are filters. And so let's just say fiction. We can also show no fee. The Grindr, I should say, defaults to no fee. And so if you want to see places that charge a submission fee, you would have to uncheck that. Here on Submittable, you have to select no fee to see ones with no fees. They are organized by date. They show you when the closing date is. That's when they stop accepting submissions for this reading period. And so here's a bunch of potential submissions. And when you click on one, it'll give you the option to submit, which will take you to the submission page here on Submittable. And it gives you the publication guidelines. You can also go to the website and learn a little bit more about the publication. This one apparently is for veterans. I'm not familiar with it, though it does look interesting. And so you can often find really cool new things through all of these services. Even though you're trying to find a place to submit your own work, you can also find great things to read. So this one does require you to have an account, but the account is free. It doesn't cost the writer anything to have a Submittable account. The service is maintained by the publications who pay Submittable when they set up an account to accept submissions. So that is Submittable. It's interesting. It's a little different because it works like some of the other ones, but it also allows you to submit your work right through the site. I would not say that this is as robust as the other options that I've showed you so far. You might find something new. They don't have quite as many listings as the Grindr, Entropy, or New Pages, or of course Duotrope. Now we're moving away from those types of websites that have these sort of database catalog scenarios going on, and we're just going to look a little at social media. If you can bring yourself to use Twitter, many literary magazines and websites will tweet when they are looking for submissions. And the way that I've found this for now is I've just looked up hashtag submissions. There are other hashtags that people use, litmag, for example, where you can find submissions. And if you are a Twitter user, you just follow the publication and they will tweet, and then you'll see their tweet when they are accepting things. There are actually some publications that only communicate about this stuff through Twitter. I don't know as much about those publications, but as you can see, there are magazines that are open for submissions. Here we have Silver Apple Magazine. I don't know anything about Silver Apple Magazine, but they are open for submissions. We found it on Twitter, and here's the submission guidelines here. If you're a writer, you can subscribe to or follow many literary magazines and publications on Twitter. And as you are scrolling through your Twitter feed, you will see when they are accepting submissions. The other cool thing about Twitter is sometimes they give you more information about what they're looking for. Like the Twitter account is actually maintained by the editor of the magazine, and you can get a little bit of inside information about the type of stuff that they're working on or looking for. Twitter can give you a good idea about the type of magazine or publication it is, let you get to know the editor a little bit. As a social media site, it has somewhat of a personal edge to it. So Twitter is, writer Twitter is something that the more you get into writing, you'll hear people talk about. Writing Twitter can be both a great place to learn about new opportunities and a fast way to get yourself down because people like to complain on writer Twitter about their challenges in the writing world. But it is an invaluable resource for writers. And I will be honest, I don't necessarily enjoy using Twitter as a regular user, and I really only use it to find submission opportunities and follow writers that I like so I can know when they publish stuff so I can go read it. Facebook works somewhat similarly if you use Facebook. I don't really use Facebook, and so I have to apologize for my relative lack of familiarity, but I do subscribe to some Facebook groups, or I joined some Facebook groups that have submission calls. This one is Open Call Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Pulp Markets. This is for genre fiction. And so places that are publishing this type of material will post it on this Facebook group. Fiction Submissions is another one. It's kind of a smaller group. Again, they talk about submissions, open submission calls for short story writers. As you can see, it's the same sort of thing. Personally, I have not found Facebook groups to be quite as helpful as Twitter. I feel like the editors use Twitter more frequently. I suppose you could just follow the publication on Facebook. I also would say, this is just anecdotal evidence from my own observations, that the editors and the publications don't interact as much on Facebook as they do on Twitter. I think Twitter is a slightly better resource for writers, but I just wanted to show you that if you are a Facebook user, you can also use Facebook to find literary magazines and places to submit. That ends my portion of resources on finding literary magazines and websites who are accepting fiction. And so the last few resources I'm going to show you are professional organizations. These aren't great for finding literary magazines and publications, but because I'm talking about resources for writers, I thought I would just briefly mention these here, starting with AWP, which is the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. They have the largest conference for writers in the country once a year. You can go and listen to writers talk on panels. You can take workshops. You can go around the book fair and see all the different publications. It's really fun. You do have to join AWP, and it does cost money. And it's not that cheap. If you are a grad student or a student or someone who's associated with a college or university, I think it's somewhat cheaper than if you're just an independent writer. But there are resources here for you as a writer, primarily if you're a literary fiction writer or a poet. The Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America is the professional organization for people who write sci-fi and fantasy. They have resources on their website for writers. Some of it is very, very useful. You would also be a member if you're a science fiction writer, and then you get more resources by being a member. If you are someone who wants to attend conferences, connect with other writers of science fiction, they have their Writers Beware page, which lists publications who do not live up to a professional standard, meaning that they will do sketchy things, steal your writing, not pay. And so if you are trying to publish a longer work, you could check the Writers Beware page if that work that you're trying to publish is speculative fiction. But they also have articles, information on ongoing developments in science fiction. They do have this page for currently open markets. It's not as robust as the ones from some other websites I've showed you, but it is still a helpful list, particularly if you're a science fiction writer. You can come here and you click on it, and it actually takes you to the page from the submission grinder. And then lastly, because I'm at Pima Community College in Tucson, I thought I would share the Society of Southwestern Authors. This is a group that you can join. They have conferences and community link programs for people in the Southwest. There are different subgroups for different areas like Tucson or Santa Cruz County or Maricopa County. And wherever you live, if you're not from the Southwest, there may be this type of organization for you where you live as well. But I just wanted to share some of those professional associations and resources to help augment the other resources that I showed you. It does take some time to find a literary magazine or website that you feel is a good match for your fiction. The best way is to submit to places that you enjoy reading. Even if you get rejected, it's still fun to try to submit and offer your work to something that you enjoy. I've been rejected from Clarkesworld magazine several times. I love reading Clarkesworld, and so when I submit, I feel like I'm offering to contribute to that community. And if they don't accept it, that's okay, because I'm going to keep reading Clarkesworld. I'm going to keep listening to the Clarkesworld podcast, and I have a pretty good idea of the type of writing that they publish. It's just a very competitive magazine to publish in. Finding new resources is a little different than getting invested in a publication and trying to submit to it, but it still can be a fun, robust discovery experience. I hope this review of publishing resources has been helpful. If you have other suggestions for how you can find places to submit your stories or what your submission process looks like, share them with other writers. It's always a great way to learn new things yourself by sharing what you know with others. Thanks for watching.